It's midterm time. There's a lot of material to cover, and we don't have a lot of time. So I'm just going to rock it through. Be sure to utilize the rewind or fast forward section in order to get the information you need. If you have questions, you can ask me. Okay, first up, here's the format. 50 questions. The first section is going to be on Weston. So that's the logic and argument textbook. So 5 true-false questions, 10 multiple choice. The rest of the exam is going to be on the readings. So that's what you read on D2L. That's the tenor, the Aeschylus reading, Shelly, what have you. There's going to be 10 true-false questions and 25 multiple choice questions. Let's cover what's going to be in the Weston section according to the midterm study guide. Caveat, I haven't seen the midterm. I don't know what the questions are. So hopefully the study guide matches the exam. So stuff that might be some general questions about argument and argument writing. You have to resolve your premises and your conclusion. Reasons lead to conclusions. Also, reasons are different from conclusions. So the conclusion, again, is the bottom line. It's the upshot. It's the takeaway. So maybe the conclusion might be, I don't know, midterms are extremely stressful for all involved. And a reason for that might be they're high-stakes summative grading exercises that seek for students to demonstrate recall at an alarming rate. That's a reason. The conclusion here would be midterms are stressful. There are also commitments. So whatever you put forth as a reason, you're committed to that. That means if you come up with a second reason that somehow contradicts the first reason, your argument's not going to be as strong. You also want to unfold your ideas in natural order. Each reason should flow or interlock with the next. This is a matter of style, but it is learnable. You can look for an example on how to do this wrong on page 3 of the Weston. You want to also start from reliable premises. Make sure your reasons are well grounded. What does well grounded mean? Well, it means they're true or they're plausible. They're from trusted sources. They're vetted. They're checked. They've passed through all of the critical steps to make sure that, the information's actually right or not, fake. You also want to be concrete and concise. You don't want to be too vague. You don't want to be overly general. You get right to the point, no filler. You want to also make sure they're built on substance, not overtone. So you want to stay away from relying solely on things like emotional appeal or emotional valence, at least for sustainable arguments. You want to figure out what the actual reasons in play are. It's not enough to just appeal to emotion. Yeah, that can sway a crowd, but crowds think eventually. So you want to make sure that your reasons actually hold up to scrutiny. And you also want to use consistent terms, right? Arguments, especially short ones, they sometimes carry one idea through several steps. Using parallelism, which is a fancy English major word for using the same language or using the same terms or words, can help emphasize that point. Those are some general ideas about arguments and argument writing. I recommend you look at Weston pages 1 through 7. Then there's the deductive forms in chapter 6. And this can seem kind of out of left field. So let me quick explain what all those P's and Q's are doing. Those are what we call sentential variables. Those are sort of shorthand for propositions or sentences that we're citing. If you see if P then Q, which you will in the next couple of minutes, then what that's saying is P or Q could stand for literally any claim, any claim, any claim. So P could stand for, if my cat Cassidy is a jerk, then Q, and Q could stand for, he gets in the way all the time. My cat Cassidy is a jerk, therefore he gets in the way all the time. Yep, that's sentential variables. They're stand-ins, because the point of deductive logic is not really the specific content of the claim. It's just looking at the structure. Unlike the colloquial sort of way we do logic, which is using the actual terms with the actual content, deductive logic isn't really concerned with the content of the sentence. What it's concerned with is the way they fit together, the structure of it. If the structure is well built, well, you won't have a cat jump on your chair. If the structure is well built, then the content is enhanced. It's harder to refute. No, you can't go on the thing. Okay. When it says valid, it's not using the colloquial term of valid, which is to say it's acceptable, you're allowed to do it, it's permissible, it's affirming. Validity in logic is not an affirmation. All it's saying is that it's impossible for the conclusion to be false if the premises are all true. It's also impossible for my cat not to get in the way. Dear God, what are you doing? Validity just refers to a structural condition of the argument. It's not an affirmation. It's saying, hey, this passed the OSHA check. What are the deductive forms? First, there's modus ponens, which means the art of pushing or the art of just basically advancing. And that looks like if P, then Q. P, therefore Q. That's it. It's a positive argument. If P is a thing, then Q's a thing. P is a thing, therefore Q's a thing. Cool. Then there's modus tollens, the art of taking. This one is the opposite of modus ponens. It's a negative Nancy. If P, then Q. Not Q. Therefore, not P. Cool. Hypothetical syllogisms consist of if P, then Q. If Q, then R. Therefore, if P, then R. Next, after the hypothetical syllogism, we have the disjunctive syllogism. Disjunctive is a scary word, but all it means is the word or. That's it. So a disjunctive syllogism is P or Q, not P, therefore Q. Cool. Then there's the dilemma. Dilemmas are weird, but we naturally do this. Dilemma is P or Q. If P, then R. If Q, then S. Therefore, R or S. Cool. And then we randomly included a proof mechanism in the book. I don't know why they did that. It's fine. The reductio ad absurdum. So this is a way of proving deductive validity. That's a different thing than a type of argument, but I suppose it's important to know. And they call it a type of argument, even though it's really just a proof. But this is just me being pedantic, and don't worry about it. We have to prove P. Cool. Let's assume the opposite. Not P. All right. From that assumption, we'd have to conclude Q. We have to show then that Q is false. Therefore, P has got to be true, I guess. Deductive validity has some limitations. Then there's argument identification. You have to figure out if the passage is an argument or not. Generally, something is an argument if it's advancing a claim. Usually, arguments aren't preferences. I like chocolate ice cream better than vanilla ice cream is not an argument. Now, if I were to say chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla ice cream because it tastes more savory, then that's an argument, or at least a premise in an argument. What are some kinds of arguments? Well, first, there's arguments by example. That can be found on page 9 of the Weston. One that I can think of right now is, I can conclude that the cats in my household are jerks because Cassidy keeps getting in my way and messing up my mixing board. He's an example. Now, is that a good argument? No, but it is an argument from example. Then there's arguments by analogy. So the astronaut example on page 19 of your Weston can help here. These rely on something being like something in order to prove it. It has a relevantly similar feature. That means, hey, this works. These two things are alike. Cool. Then there's arguments from authority. This one is tricky because it also can lead into fallacious reasonings too. So what does that look like? X, where X is an authority of some kind, an expert, says that Y. Therefore, Y is true. The Weston book goes into a lot of vetting the authority that you're citing, and I would encourage looking at that in case that worries you, which it should, because not all authorities are equal. Then there's arguments about causes. So arguments about causes, they're typically concerned with things like establishing a correlation first, then moving on to alternative explanations to rule out the cause you might have in mind. And then they use the most likely explanation from the data you've gathered, otherwise known as inference to best explanation, which is basically abductive reasoning. I've thrown a bunch of words at you. Let's go ahead and calm that down. Most likely explanation just means we're aiming for the simplest possible explanation given the data. Sometimes that's wrong. It's okay. And that's where expecting complexity can help. Because if the simple explanation doesn't perfectly fit it, that means there's more things at play than just what you've cited. It's fairly straightforward. If it's simple but it doesn't fit that well, there's more going on. You build that in, and then you have a better explanation. Then there's deductive arguments. We've already covered those. Good news. They're the things that I covered with disjunctive syllogism and modus ponens and modus dolens. That's fun. And then there's extended arguments. These can take a lot of forms, but usually they're a combination of the arguments that we've already identified, or they're arguments that we've already identified and they have nested premises. What does that mean? It means each premise is a conclusion to another argument. Rather than thinking of it like one straight argument, you have a little reason. That reason is actually the conclusion to a separate argument that you make. It's like nesting dolls. They also usually explore alternatives, and they usually refute objections, or at least address objections. That's also a sign of an extended argument. Usually extended arguments are found in either op-eds, journalistic pieces, or philosophy articles. And then finally, there's conclusion identification. Conclusions, again, are just the bottom line, the takeaway, the thing that we're supposed to come away with after we've read all the reasons. There are usually signal words for this. So like, in conclusion, or therefore, or the heart of the matter, or we can then surmise that blah, 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 blah. You get the idea, hopefully. And if you don't, you can ask me questions. As far as the fallacies are concerned, it doesn't look like on the midterm study guide that he's actually focusing on the fallacies, but we can also go over those real quick. There's a bunch of different types of fallacies, subjectivist credibility, structural context. And the way to sort of break that down is maybe emotion, believability, structure as far as the argument structure, and context, right? There's appeal to pity. An example of an appeal to pity would be, we should be patient with harsh graders because they were graded harshly when they were students. That's an appeal to pity. But the problem is it assumes one is an exception to a purported standard, and also what makes being a harsh grader justified if they too went through it? That doesn't make it right. It just means it's a kind of traditional hazing. You can also appeal to emotion, right? So appealing to a crowd or appealing to the emotions of a people, that can be useful rhetorically, but it doesn't always mean sustainable reasons have been had. Emotions are fickle. Feelings change. Positions change. And it means that if we just are trying to hit the same emotional button over and over and over, sometimes that doesn't work. So frequently, just because someone feels it doesn't always mean it's right. Then there's credibility fallacies. You probably already know this one, ad hominem, right? So this is attacking the person rather than the argument that they make, right? There are exceptions to this, of course, but ad hominem usually means it's a relevance fallacy, right? There are quite a bit of statements that we can make to dismiss people that aren't ad hominem. So if a Nazi decided to get in my face about something, I would probably dismiss them because they're a Nazi. And why would I listen to them? On the other hand, If someone's trying to convince me that I should adopt harsh grading policies, and the fact that I don't is a testament to the lack of rigor in the discipline, and I responded with, "You're a duty head," that's an ad hominem. I'm not really speaking relevantly. What I need to speak to there is, are these rigor standards actually what you think they are? Then there's structural fallacies. There's ad ignorantium, which is an appeal to ignorance. It has to do with the logical structure or the language of the argument being uttered. Basically, it's arguing that a claim is true just because it has not been shown to be false. A really common version of this is, since it is not shown to be false that aliens exist, that the fact that aliens have not yet been disproven means that there must be aliens. Not exactly. I mean, there could be. I don't know. But having that skeptical claim doesn't mean you have positive proof. There's a difference. Then there's a lot of structural ones that you can ask me about, because that's kind of getting us into the weeds a bit, and we have so much to cover. So if you really want to know about affirming the consequent, which I don't think will be on the exam, it better not be, or denying the antecedent and all that, then you can ask me about that, and I can give you specific examples. This is Introduction and Odd Concept, and the first thing on the midterm study guide is division between scholars and technicians. What does that mean? Well, the scholars are typically intellectuals who specialize in the use of words. They specialize in abstract thought. They specialize in working with non-material knowledge. That's their whole thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's always a firm distinction between the two. But most scholars, they're not going to be working with material world stuff. Others, technicians, they tend to work with transforming the material world. They're all about the concrete materials, getting things done, build a house, build a ball. There's some sort of material thing at the end of it, And again, these distinctions don't always hold. Sometimes scholars are also technicians. Sometimes technicians are also scholars. See also scientists. They're not just about practice. They're also about theory. Understanding that they're two different positions can help with understanding approaches to certain things, like technology. So the idea here is that maybe, yes, we should listen to the people who make the microchips, but we should also listen to the people who come up with the theory for making microchips. Then there's the instrumentalism in technology versus the cultural approach to technology. Instrumentalism is a $10 word that just refers to this thing is useful for this other consequence. So instrumentalism for technology is a really common view right now. Technology is just a tool that we use for various purposes. That's an instrumental view. That's it. It doesn't have any cultural value. It doesn't have any intrinsic value. It doesn't really do much. It's just a neutral tool meant for use. All of the value and culture shit, that comes from the people using it. That's instrumentalism. So technologies are value neutral. We are the ones who give technology value. It has nothing to offer other than that. Then there's the cultural approach to technology. Here, technology is not value neutral. It expresses values of the societies or social groups that create it. What the fuck does that mean? It means that the society that we live in tends to be permeated or filled with all kinds of attitudes, assumptions, presumptions about the world. These presumptions don't just stay in the background. They're not just there. They make it into our thinking, whether we know it or not, whether we choose it or not. A good example of this kind of thing is the obsession with use in American society. We're obsessed with use. Is it useful? What determines useful? What determines how use is conceived? How do we go about doing this? But I think it's worthwhile thinking that maybe this obsession with utility, with use, might not be natural. Maybe it's social. What is useful for us is not always good. For instance, I'm a nicotine addict, right? I am shamefully a person who has to smoke in order to feel awake. Right now, cigarettes are a way for me to feel awake. That doesn't mean I should be doing it. I need to quit. Just need to get past my comprehensive exams. You think this midterm is bad? Oh my God. Anyway. Just because something's useful doesn't mean it's good. Just because something is considered useless doesn't mean it's bad. That's an example of a social assumption, a social value. That is to say, a value that comes from society. And those sorts of attitudes, those sorts of ways of going about business, yeah, they're going to affect the way that we build, create, and imagine. Who'd thunk it? The cultural approach to technology assumes that technology is not value neutral, that it's expressing the values, and that they're embedded in the very technologies themselves, right? The examples that Jason used are, was a clocks, printing press, and spacecraft. So I think spacecraft probably will work here. Think about the shuttle. Think about any of the space shuttle or the space missions. Those aren't just value neutral endeavors. They're political ones. There was a space race between us and Russia. And it represented the ability to access a new border, to transcend the new border or the old border of the atmosphere and go and, see if we can put a flag in the moon. The technology itself is integrally bound up. It's entangled with political projects. And this can be unhappy for a lot of folks. It's sometimes unhappy for me. And again, cultural and instrumental approaches, they can have some blurry boundaries, right? So you might be wondering, what is technological somnambulance? Again, $15 words. What do these mean? It means somnambulance actually just literally means sleepwalking. That's it. Just means sleepwalking. So what is meant by something like technological somnambulance? Well, it just means the blasé attitude about the material conditions of humanity. What the hell does that mean? It just means that we don't really look at the things in technology that change us. We just look at the use. Use dominates most of our hermeneutic frame. Is it useful to us? Does it make it something faster? Does it let us do our work more efficiently? Instead of looking at, does it exhaust us? Does it make us richer in the sense of character, not in the sense of pocketbook? Does it make us better people? That's something to think about. And there are cases absolutely where they make better people, where it makes a better people, at least technological access. But there are some cases where not really, no. When we're talking about technological somnambulance, we're talking about sleepwalking. We're talking about being ignorant about technology's effect on ourselves. That's Schatzberg. On to Aeschylus. So the characters of Prometheus Bound are Prometheus, who is the cunning Titan, stole fire from Zeus, gives it to humanity, originator of all human arts. Name means forethought or foresight. He could see the future, but he didn't share it. He just shared the fire. That's it. He did not share the future. He shared the fire. That's it. There's Kratos and Via, power and force. There's Zeus's power personified. They're people. That's fine. Don't worry about it. They're just kind of there. There's Hephaestus. He's the Greek god of crafting, metalwork, fire. He walks with a limp. He's disabled solidarity. He's also sympathetic because he's a nice dude. He's in a volcano. He chills. He makes shit. Then there's the daughters of Ocean, the chorus. A Greek chorus is basically they're there to help the viewers to understand the themes, and they also interfere with the play occasionally. They also sympathize with Prometheus. And then there's Ocean, the Titan. She is the river that surrounds the earth. Then there's Io, not Lo, Io. She's immortal. She was an object of Zeus's desire, unfortunately. And due to that, she was turned into a cow. Moo. And then there's Hermes. He's just Zeus's messenger. He's just like, hey, what up? I got a message. Okay, bye. The setting of the play. The whole thing takes place in the northern area of what was called Scythia. Is it a place where scythes live? Maybe. But really, it's just the modern day Central Asia and Eastern Europe. Turkey. Ta-da! The audience at the time would understand it to be a cold and lonely place, far away from home. And he's bound to a rock by Hephaestus, at Zeus's command. Thanks, Zeus. So the major themes, there's nature. We get the Scythian Caucasus, which are harsh, angular ravines. He's bound to a rocky crag. And then we have Io's wanderings through difficult, dangerous, and unfamiliar lands, right? We have the senses. So Prometheus, pro before Manthano to understand, foresight, So those are big, the senses of rationality, of cognition, of learning. Those are large themes. The politics and power. Well, Zeus is a new ruler at this time in the story. Zeus just locked away his parents, or killed one of them. No, I think locked away. His father, Cronus. Time was basically eating his children. Really, literally eating his children. He's the newly crowned king of the universe. He's the top of the heap. He's the jackass in the mountain. And unfortunately, because he's new, he's kind of zealous with it. And, well, he's a little harsh. Prometheus, who's also a Titan. So he's not a god. He's not an Olympian god. He's not like Zeus. He's actually above Zeus. Prometheus is a forgiving and interesting guy. Prometheus helped Zeus overthrow his father, and he thinks he doesn't really deserve his punishment, but he kind of goes along with that anyway. Then there's the arts, craft, and technology, which in the midterm study guide 451 and 517 of Aeschylus can be helpful here. So Prometheus gave humanity knowledge of the seasons, numbers, writing, domesticating animals, harnessing of horses, the art of sailing, medicine, divination, sacrificial practices, and metalworks. Well, damn. Dude was a giver. One way that we can think about Prometheus bound, there's the tragic, pessimistic way. On one end, we can think of Prometheus as the fire giver and thus bestowing the ability to have moral culpability, to have sin, to do wrong, right? Prometheus didn't give us a gift, he gave us a curse. Or we could go with the heroic, optimistic view. The crafts that Prometheus gave us are linked with human liberation from the gods or from nature. Because now we can keep warm. Now we can make things to keep us warm. With the power of fire, we are now godlike. And fire is the foundation for all crafts. That's Aeschylus. Again, ask me questions if you have any. Havelock and Barney. Can't forget Barney. We have the three views of technological humanity, which we already covered. The tragic pessimistic view, the optimistic view, and then the moderate view. The moderate view says we must accept but critically assess the tension between the tragic and optimistic views. There's a middle ground, in other words, between blind optimism and hopeless despair. When it comes to technology, we might think of scientific knowledge as being not just something that will spell our doom, or not just something that will automatically be always good, but instead has to be responsibly handled, just like most tools. Controversial, I know. According to Havelock, the tragic view is very much about the elimination of quality in favor of quantity, or in other words, to make things deterministic. I'll unpack what that actually means. So under the tragic view, Earth is not unique. Humans are just a speck in geological time. Nature doesn't give a shit. Nothing gives a shit about this. There's the universe is cold, unfeeling, math and physics churning out forever. And we are just carrying out a particular story of neurons firing in our brains according to what our DNA determines for us. And in that way, we are deterministic. Determinism is just basically, it's the opposite of free will, that everything has a cause, and that cause is why we do things. We don't choose, we're determined by external factors. And a purely deterministic picture eliminates free will and moral agency and the concept of hope. That's not to say that, again, There's no middle ground between determinism and free will, which is to say, libertarian. Don't confuse it with political libertarians. Very different. Determinism is part of the tragic view. But then there's the kind of moderate view where our amassed knowledge isn't outmoded. It's not useless. The causes of why we think the way we do are relevant, but they don't completely overrun our choices. They just mean they influence it, maybe steer it a little bit. But ultimately, if we want to push against it, we can. What would be the optimist view? The idea is that our craft, our technology gives us the mean to illuminate and perhaps control the world. We no longer have limitations. Our technology will somehow make us immortal. I would recommend looking through the historical framework of the moderate view here in the class notes. Those are pretty detailed. Thank you, Jordan. On to the gothiest goth to ever goth, Mary Shelley. Seriously, if you look up Mary Shelley, like, so goth, gother than thou. What are the characters and their roles for Frankenstein? So first we have Victor Frankenstein. You know him. He's the doctor. He's the scientist. He's the inventor. You have the monster. You have Walton, the ship captain who rescues Frankenstein. You have Elizabeth, who's Frankenstein's adopted cousin and fiance. Okay. You have Henry Clerval, who's Frankenstein's friend and fellow researcher. You have William, who's Victor's younger brother. You have Justine, who is the friend and sometimes live-in of the Frankenstein family. She's just there. It's fine. You have Alphonse, Frankenstein, Victor's father. You have DeLacy, who's the blind man whose family takes in the monster. And you have Agatha, who's DeLacy's daughter, and Felix, who's DeLacy's son. Those are the characters of the book. Hooray, we listed them. So what's the framing technique? What does that refer to? Well, it just refers to the structure of the story. How is the story built? How is the story framed? How does all this work? First, we have the outer frame of it. And that's just Walton, the ship's captain who rescued Victor. He writes some letters to his sister going, wow, found a weird guy. He's weird. Then you have the inner frame, which is Frankenstein's retelling of his story. So Victor's going, yes, I've done all these things. And dear God, what have I done? And then you have the core, which is the monster's story. Why use this as a framing technique? What's the point? Well, it does enhance the realism, as far as an epistolary, a letter-bound novel is concerned. It is told as stories other people tell to third parties. It kind of contains fallible narrators. People are telling the best versions of themselves and the worst versions of others. It creates doubt that way. It's a testimony, in other words. So then there's Frankenstein's desire for knowledge, right? He wants to fulfill curiosity. He wants to help humanity with his medical knowledge, but a lot of it is arrogance too. He's not interested in limitations. He's not interested in boundaries. What is he interested in? He wants to know everything. And sometimes, perhaps things shouldn't be known. Perhaps some knowledge in and of itself is dangerous. The secret of how to recreate life, how to animate dead tissue, and is dangerous not because of the threat that, the monster creates for other people, though the monster does murder, but instead dangerous because who is ready for that awesome responsibility of bringing a life back into this world? Victor sure as hell won't. Sleep tap, everybody. What might the monster represent? He could represent hope. He basically is the destruction of Victor, so hope kind of gone sour, but at the same time, he could be something more than what he was. And in a way, he is. He kind of becomes a philosopher, in a way. Or maybe he's a child. Maybe he can be seen as sort of uncontrollable. Or maybe he's Adam himself, the first human, which gestures at the big theme that all of you have already heard of, which is Victor Frankenstein is playing God. That is to say, taking without authority or adequate consideration the kind of power to create life. and he's not ready for it. He could also just be, Prometheus. This ties into sort of the idea that, well, he's some sort of new technology, new craft maker. He's a sign of things to come. He also could be an example of political upheaval or change, right? Through resuscitating old ideas, old parts, the monster could indeed be representative of revolutionary activity, something created with hope, something that could bring something new, something that could be a new order, and yet always exceeds the grasp of those who start it, whether for good or for ill. Is the monster a person? The really irritating answer to this is depends on how you conceive of a person. Personhood is what we call a problematic concept. It's a concept that has a history. It's a concept that has been used in really skeezy ways. See also slavery. See also eugenics. See also colonialism. See also a bunch of really harmful stuff. So automatically, when we're dealing with, is this thing a person or not? We're on thin ice. So we got to be careful. Maybe one way that we can think about personhood is what might qualify, something like physiology or recognition by others or self-consciousness or some mystical will or morality, capable of the capability to be right or wrong. Maybe it's reason. Maybe it's being part of a community. Maybe it's language. There's a lot here. We could think about whether or not those particular conditions I just listed off, whether they're necessary or sufficient. The easy way to keep necessary and sufficient straight in your head is this. A necessary condition means that if that condition don't happen, the whole thing doesn't happen. A sufficient condition means every time that thing happens, the whole thing is successful. So a necessary condition to be a human would be respiration of air. Without respiration of air, we die. Cool. So a sufficient condition, an example of that, would be if the condition to be satisfied is it's the 4th of July, and you look on your phone and it says July 4th. That's a sufficient condition. They're a little silly. Then there's tenor. With tenor, we get the effects collection. And I'm not talking about the network that shows Archer and Legion. I'm talking about effects as in consequences. Tenor is obsessed with them. So here we go. Revenge effect. So the definition of revenge effect is found on page 6 of the reading, where it is the ironic unintended consequences of mechanical, chemical, biological, and medical ingenuity. What does that mean? Well, why is it ironic, don't you think? Well, some technologies induce behavior which appears to cancel out the very reason for using it. So an example of that, cancer treatments that cause equally lethal other cancers or diseases, or child safety requirements on airlines that force families to drive instead. So further examples, revenge effects are different. They're different than side effects or trade-offs. So for instance, let's go back to a treatment for cancer. Chemotherapy, radiation therapy, it has a tendency to cause baldness. That's a side effect. It's unintentional, but sometimes it happens, but it doesn't negate the reason why the treatment is there. An example of a revenge effect, would be a cancer treatment that causes cancer, or a hair growth treatment that causes baldness, or safety features that decrease safety. There's way back in the day, way before either you or I were born, there was a car called the Ford Pinto. And that thing was supposed to be really safe and affordable. And then it was discovered that Ford actually covered up in the manufacture of the Pinto a deadly flaw in the car. Because if it got ever so slightly bumped by another car or rear-ended, a chain reaction involving the tailpipe would cause the car to explode. Yeah, go look on YouTube about it. What are the types of revenge effects? There's a bunch of them. The rearranging effect. The rearranging effect occurs when technologies or social customs and laws force things into new places. Think of a vacuum cleaner. It can move the dirt around, but doesn't get rid of the dust mites. Does it really get rid of the dirt? Not really. It just moves it around. There's repeating effects, which occurs when a new technology in guise of freeing up time and space ends up not doing that. It does the opposite. Improvements in medical treatments can lead to more elective surgeries. There's recomplicating effects where a new technology makes things easier in one area, but makes other things far more difficult. So for example of a recomplicating effect, the redesign on D2L, it was supposed to make things easier, and in some ways it has, but the information is now completely scattered all over it, and nobody knows where anything is today or tomorrow. Then there's the regenerating effect. That occurs when a technology is used for some purpose and it ends up multiplying the problems it was supposed to solve. So the idea here is that, well, let's take a Patriot missile, right? A Patriot was used to defend against another kind of missile, which blows them up. Hooray! And then that turns into multiple smaller projectiles. Oh no, it's chaff. Then there's the recongesting effects. That occurs when a technology opens up a space that is either abandoned later or becomes overcrowded. When we're thinking about that, we might think about the fancy arenas or theatrical technology that happens associated with the Olympics. Literally, the Olympic arenas in many major cities across the world are abandoned, and they take up space and they're not torn down. They're just there, and they end up displacing communities because of it. That's cheerful. And then there's this whole thing about devices and systems. A device is just an individual unit, an iPhone. When it fails, that doesn't necessarily always affect other devices or things. Now, a system, that's an interconnected network of things that work together and are dependent on each other. And if there's a failure there, then it causes a kind of cascade effect. Many things fail instead of just one. So this could be something like a mechanical or electrical failure in a car, an electrical grid problem, and so on. What are some characteristics of systems? Since that's, having this network of things is kind of vague, they can either be loosely coupled or tightly coupled. What does that mean? Loosely coupled means that there's open access in several places. The failure of one part doesn't affect the other parts as much. Tightly coupled means that, when parts are really super dependent on each other, and if one falls apart, they'll definitely fall apart. And usually when a tightly coupled system has a lot of parts linked together in multiple ways, not just, in one way or another, that creates complexity because the interaction is suddenly unpredictable, at least according to Tenor. What is the solution according to Tenor? Vigilance, I guess. He states that, one problem with technological solutions, they make us less vigilant somehow. For example, I think the example he uses are people are less concerned with proactive safety because of fire alarms, which, okay, the presumption of safety, in other words, makes it more likely that we'll take risks. There's also this whole thing of maintenance compulsion where we try to get things right in the system from the beginning. However, in some ways, acute problems with systems can lead to chronic problems. What might an example of that be? Well, there's an acute problem on TikTok right now where if you look at a certain form of content, you end up being sucked algorithmically due to the association with a particular form of politics. You end up being sucked algorithmically into more extreme alt-right holes. There's actually a whole thing on this. And if you're interested in knowing more about this, I can give you a bunch of articles about it. An acute issue, just to be clear, an acute issue means that it happens once and it doesn't repeat. A chronic issue means it happens and it keeps happening and it keeps happening and it keeps happening. And sometimes acute issues can cause chronic issues in the sense of acute issues end up getting repeated by multiple people, which then affects an algorithm, and which then means the algorithm will trend that way due to the repetition of acute issues. All right. King, when creations go bad. What is King talking about? Well, first of all, moral absolutism. So recall that moral absolutism is the idea that there are universal moral standards that we can appeal to, and they apply to any given situation. Doesn't matter the time, doesn't matter the place, doesn't matter the person. There are certain acts that we can always say are good or bad. On the other hand, we got moral relativism, which is the idea that there are no universal moral standards we can appeal to, and instead it's indexed to context or individuals or cultures or what have you. And this leads us to a kind of dilemma, because how do we know which one is right? Well, under moral relativism, none of them and all of them at once. And then there's moral nihilism. And that, according to the lecture, was started and popularized by Nietzsche. But the idea is that this morality talk is nonsense. There is no such thing as morals. What are you doing? Stop it. All right. And then there's the application to the Frankenstein problem. So what is the Frankenstein problem? Well, the idea that we can go into a scientific endeavor or a technological endeavor with good intent to help. A mistake is made, and then the consequence runs rampant. And King compares Victor to Mark Zuckerberg. So when it comes to this comparison, King says that, well, the intent was he wanted to connect the world virtually through the medium. Never mind that he actually just wanted to get laid. His mistake was he neglected the social harms that were being amplified by Facebook, not caused by Facebook. And the consequence being that, well, our discourse has irreparably shifted and will continue shifting. And now we have to deal with that. I may have finessed some terms there. Last part. We're almost there. So the last part is 2 chapters from Turkle and 2 Plato tales. So Turkle's obsessed with authenticity. Her basic argument is that technology promises a certain intimacy with others, but offers instead mere substitutions for real, authentic intimacy. What is authentic intimacy? Usually face-to-face conversation, that real, ineffable, which means indescribable, human connection somehow. And that because social media is overly performative, instead we don't get authenticity. Authenticity is not performative at all. And one cannot be intimate with a robot. One cannot be intimate with strangers on the internet. And we can't tell whether social media relations are authentic. The idea of how it connects to revenge effects, well, a lot of these social media networks were meant to connect ourselves with others, to form communities. And Turkle concludes that somehow it has not formed communities. Instead, it's serving the lowest common denominator, and we end up feeling isolated. It's also supposed to be a time saver. And an easy example of that is TikTok. I don't have time to read a blog post, so I'm going to watch this 15-second video. And then 3 hours later, I'm in a rabbit hole watching people fold laundry. Why am I on Laundry Talk? Help me. The Plato-like issue when it comes to caring behavior. For most people, the blurring of intimacy and solitude begins when one creates a profile on social networking site or builds a persona or avatar for a game or virtual world. Over time, such performances of identity may feel like identity itself. That's a quote from Turkle. She maintains that robot and networking technology only perform caring behavior. They don't actually care. It gives you the appearance of care, not the reality of care. That's how it's connected to the cave. Remember that the myth of the cave is a bunch of prisoners in a cave are chained up and they can only look forward. And there are people making little shadow plays, and they mistake that for reality. It's an old thing, and I have issues with it, but okay. It's about the difference between appearance and reality. Cool. Robots appear to care, but they don't actually because they're incapable of it. Let's move on. We'll get back to Myth of the Cave in a minute. Let's move on to the Ring of Gyges. So Glaucon uses the Ring of Gyges, which is a ring that basically turns you invisible. He uses it as a test for justice. How? Well, it's supposed to be a thought experiment designed to show that everyone is corruptible given the right circumstances. And he maintains that it's rational to choose given the option living a life being unjust but seeming just versus a life of being just and seeming unjust. Okay. How might the metaphor be applied to social media? Could it inform how one reflects on social media with with your profile? So Jason brings up, you create a profile that may leave things about you out, exaggerate other things. It also creates an algorithmic you. I brought up the idea of an algorithmic shirt. And does that suddenly change us in how we behave in everyday life? The same thing with creating a Twitter handle. Does it change how we start to view ourselves if we take it very seriously? It can also be interesting in the way anonymity can empower people in shaping how they understand themselves. It can allow identity exploration. It can allow certain forms of political discussions. Growing up in West Michigan, I can tell you there are certain things that are politically taboo to discuss. See my glasses for a hint about that. Anonymity has helped me find communities in the past, in my 20s, that I'm like, oh, cool. I can do this safely now. Nice. Or can it corrupt, Can anonymity do things that are otherwise bad? It can, because we're not going to get any consequences. This is where, the story of 4chan and 7chan usually gets brought up here. I think these days, hell, Yik Yak's making a comeback. That's weird. And there's the usual sort of identity exploration creation problem where the problem that existed before in printed media where people don't realize that all, and I really do mean all celebrities were airbrushed and they internalize beauty standards from movies or public appearances for movies where, again, they're airbrushed. They have a whole team of makeup artists and that team does a lot. They don't just get out of bed looking like that. Not even Beyonce. For real. And then internalizing that and causing body dysmorphia and what have you. Or at least contributing, I won't say causing. Let's go to Myth of the Cave. Hooray. Promise we're almost done. I'm saying that just for me as well as you. Myth of the Cave. Again, the situation is this. Bunch of people in a cave. They're chained to a wall. There are people making shadow puppet theaters. The people chained to the wall, apparently ignorant that they have bodies and that they're in a cave and that they can feel the cave. And all of the senses there are somehow dulled. Magically, they mistake the shadow puppet theater for reality. It has the appearance of reality because apparently the people making the shadow puppets are fucking baller at making shadow puppets. Holy shit. These guys are the ILM of shadow puppetry. Okay. Sorry. I've always hated this particular story. It's not okay. It's fine. It's drawing our attention between the difference between appearance and reality. So appearance is an image of reality. It's unstable. It's changing. It's fleeting. It's fickle. It's physical. It's the world of becoming. Reality, for Plato, is stable, eternal, unchanging, timeless, non-physical. Yep. It gives us an image of how to make the distinction between what is apparently real and what is really real. It's a kind of justification story for an old school of philosophy. Philosophers venture down into the cave of ignorance and save people from the evil shadow puppet play of ignorance and bring them into the light of reason. Plato believes that justice, the good, and beauty are real. Cool. All right. This has been a midterm review. This hopefully will help you understand. Please refer to Jordan's excellent notes Please ask me questions before Sunday night. Please do your best. And remember, you are more than your grade.